Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of The Good Shepherd. In today's show, we're going to be talking about the importance of time, the importance of spending time in a right way. Not saying that you always should be working, always should be doing something that is related to work or effort or whatever, but how to actually make use of the good time, how to know when to work, when to push yourself hard, when to reward yourself, when to have some time off. And joining us here in the studio to shed more light on this issue is Father Peter Farrington from the British Orthodox Church. Father Peter, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Hani, for inviting me.
Father Peter, how do we strike this balance of actually knowing when to push ourselves harder and when to actually relax, how to spend our free time, how to make use of the time we have, because time is something that when it goes by, you can't even buy it back. So how can we really make sure that the time spent is important and useful?
Yes. I think first of all, we have to ask ourselves, what do we mean by free time? Because as you say, all time is extremely valuable, in fact. We only have one life in this earth. We have many things to accomplish for God and in the society around us, for our families and in our own lives. So our time is precious and valuable. And we must be careful that when we think of free time, we don't think of time that doesn't matter, that we can waste. Now, of course, as you've said, we don't imagine that we can always be at work. That will not make us healthy people at all. And God certainly doesn't require us to spend every moment of our life in church either or in service. I'm reminded of one story from the deserts in Egypt. There was a great Abba, and a disciple came to him and said, "Father, I see that the other monks over there are laughing and playing. Why don't you go and tell them to be quiet and get about their work?" And he spoke to the young man who had come up to him, and he said, "Pick up that bow there that you see." And he picked up a bow and he pulled it. And he said, "Now pull it some more." And he used all his strength to pull back the bow as far as he could. And he said, "Now pull it even more." And he said, "Father, I cannot. If I pull it any farther, the bow will break." And the monastic father said, "So it is with each one of these. We can push them and push them, but at some point, each one of us needs to relax and needs to gain refreshment in our life." And so we certainly shouldn't think that because we are committed Orthodox Christians, that means that every moment of our life should be engaged in work or in service in the church or in services, in prayer and liturgy. There is absolutely a proper time for us to seek that refreshment of mind and body which is required for us to be able to serve and work properly. The human being needs to sleep each night. And when we don't sleep, we very rapidly see that the people we are talking to who haven't had enough sleep, they begin to find it harder to concentrate. And after several days of not getting any sleep, in fact, they begin to have real physical complications that can harm them. We are created as people that have to sleep. And part of that need for sleep is to allow our minds, our brains, to calm down and sort out the thoughts that have been going through their circuits during the day. And it's the same with the bodies that God has given us. If we are constantly sat at a desk working hard, for a while we can work with great industry. But after a while we will start to feel physical effects in our body, and we really will begin to break down. And so God does give to us and require of us that care of our mind and body which needs refreshment and it needs relaxation. But we have to be careful, I think, how we use that time we set aside for this purpose. Many people will say that they have set aside an afternoon for that sort of refreshment that is required, and then we discover that they have gone from hunched over a desk at work to hunched over a computer screen in their bedroom. We find that people who have filled their minds with concentration, looking at machinery in a factory, they come home and they are concentrating too much on some activity at home, playing on an Xbox for 8 or 9 hours perhaps. So we have to be sure that the free time God gives us, we are not wasting in ways that do not refresh us properly. It seems to me that it is good to have a mix of activities in our life and to have prepared them ahead so that they are already part of the same routine which sees us going to work each morning, sees us attending church services in the evening and at the weekend. we should in the same way decide, on this day, I take part in this activity. Perhaps I'm a member of a sports club. At school, I play football or rugby or whatever sport we enjoy. Perhaps at the weekend, we make sure that in an afternoon we go for a walk in a park or something like that. It seems to me necessary for us to think ahead and treat the free time that we have as seriously as we do our activities in church and at work, because it's passing and we'll never get it back, and God gives it to us for a purpose. And if we waste it, then we will be liable to account for it in the end.
Well, what about people who, they might not be lazy, but maybe a little bit sluggish, and they don't know how to estimate how much time is needed for different tasks, and they're usually late for appointments, late for finishing certain tasks on time. How can they change such a habit? How can they teach themselves to be more efficient with the time they spend?
That can be a problem, and that can be the sort of class that even a church can arrange, because many of the aspects of time management are secular ones. They're not essentially spiritual ones. And it would be good to go on the internet, find some YouTube videos that explain to you how you can organise your life better, buying a diary, filling in an agenda for the day. There are many such ways. I think the main issue, though, with people who find it hard to manage their time is that often we have a lack of respect and care for other people. If I really respect people, then I wish to be on time when I arrive at their house. In fact, I'm rather obsessive in that way. And if I've arranged to be at a friend's house for 7 o'clock, I actually like to be there exactly at 7 o'clock so that I can press that doorbell at the time I've arranged. That's a slightly odd feature of my own self. But I hate being late. I would rather be 1 hour early because of the trains and then wait outside until I go into their house than be 15 minutes late. My parents taught me this because it seemed to them that it was disrespectful of people to make them wait for me to arrive. And I know that different cultures have different understandings of what it means to be on time. But certainly in the West, if we say that something will happen on a time, people expect it to take place then. If I was working for a large company in an important position, and I was told that I was to do a presentation before the CEO and all of the senior board, and if they said the presentation was to take place at 9 o'clock and I didn't arrive until 10, then I would expect to be in trouble. I'd expect that when promotions came, I would be passed over. There would be consequences for my action if I couldn't show that there was some real and genuine reason while I was late, because it would show disrespect for them. It would show that I didn't value their senior position in the company. I think that we should treat all of the people that we are working and living with that same sense of respect. We should plan our day and fulfill the purposes that we have with a sense that we are doing something for God in each activity that we take care of. There are those practical aspects of timekeeping we can learn from others, but in our spirits and in our hearts as Christians, we must seek to put others first and respect others. And then I think that has a very great effect on our timekeeping.
So why do people, or not why, but how can people deal or figure out that they're actually having a little bit too much of wasted time? And how can parents enhance and really highlight the importance of time management within their kids?
In terms of free time, I think especially for people who are growing into adulthood and can think seriously about things, and especially when you are an adult and even when you're married, you can waste your free time just as easily. I think it is necessary to ask yourself from time to time, what am I trying to achieve in my life outside of work and immediate church services? You know, am I trying to learn a language? When we are adults, it's often a hobby that we set ourselves, but we can then see as we go through the year, am I actually making any progress? Am I interested in sport? Then we can decide that one afternoon each week we will join a local team so that we have a commitment to go and spend our time in that way. I think the problem is when we reach the end of a day and we cannot easily think what we have done with the 5 or 6 or 8 hours that we have had outside of work and away from church. And I think that if we were to start accounting for our time in the same way that we try to review whether we have sinned or not, then we start to see that we are wasting it. There is nothing wrong with coming home from work and feeling very tired and laying down for half an hour. But if it is a weekend and I'm spending half of the day dozing and waking up slightly and dozing, then unless I have some real reason for having been very tired that week, I think I can consider that I have wasted it. So I think that, as in all things, we must have some preparation. What do I plan to do at the beginning of this year of 2015? What do I plan to do in my free time? We don't have to program every minute, of course, but are there one or two things that we want to be doing? Are there books that we wish to read? Will we set aside a certain amount of time so that we read one book each week? We need to have some little goals that are enjoyable to us, that will help us relax and be refreshed, but that take us away from wasting the hours that God gives us.
What about the unemployed? Now, how can the unemployed invest their time? How can they manage their own time? They don't have not necessarily a job that they're actually going to every morning. Maybe they're married with kids, maybe not. How can they invest their time?
I think that people who are unemployed find great benefit in finding a means of occupying their time. One of the great disadvantages of being unemployed is you have so much time to reflect on the fact that you aren't doing what you want to be doing. And if you can find some service, I don't mean necessarily church service at all, if you can find some service in the community that is of real value, that gives you a sense of dignity in what you're doing, then that is extremely important for unemployed people, and it allows them to enter into a balance where they also are working in the community as well as serving in the church. And then they can have a free time which is just as valuable as for those who work. It may be that there are elderly people who have some meetings in the town where we live. Can we go and support them? Are there children with disability who need volunteers to come and help them? It must be very easy in the West, I know it is, to go to the library and find a list of organisations that are looking for volunteers. And to volunteer your service is a task that gives dignity to our lives. It fills our time with value, and it allows us then to enjoy those periods each day when we are not working in the same way and find refreshment in them. So there is no excuse, I think. The unemployed person needs to be employing their time, even if they're not able to find a paying position at the moment.
Well, back again to the family institution, how can a family really plant the seed of time management and really investing time in their kids? How can they teach their kids to invest time in something constructive, something beneficial?
I think there are two ways. When children are younger and are entirely under the direction of their parents, it is necessary for parents to lead their children into the proper use of free time. Those parents who simply want the children to run away and take care of themselves will bring their children up to have no focus in their lives or in their free time. But parents who, despite their own tiredness after work and despite all the responsibilities of running a home, as well as being engaged in church, those parents who are willing to spend time in taking their children to learn dancing of some sort, to take their children to engage in sport, to say to their children, on this evening, this is what we do, bring their children up to understand that there is a routine that must be employed in life. Many times children will say, I don't want to go and do this activity anymore. And when the father or the mother say, well, no, we are doing it, you're not giving it up, it's a way of teaching children from a young age that they must persevere at something. And then we have some real hope that when they are older and take up some activity in their free time, they will persevere at it. They've learnt not to give up at the first sign of some struggle. So I think that much of the responsibility lies with parents when their children are very young, to give them a mix of activities, to fill their free time with some order and discipline, so that their children grow up expecting that order in their own adult lives.
Well, what about having a lot of free time? Does it have different effects or consequences on young people and old people? Do different age groups react differently to having a lot of free time?
I think that it's been shown that having too much empty free time is very harmful to us. I think of old people who are in homes with many other old people, sitting quietly with nothing to do for a whole day. This doesn't only affect their mental agility, it creates physical and psychological problems for them as well. And the very best homes for elderly people are ones where their long days are filled with activities. Because elderly people wish to be engaged fully with their mind, their bodies as far as they are able as well. It's part of what's necessary for us as humans. And I think that we see this in youth also. Where they have too much unstructured time, they very often turn into harmful habits, dangerous habits even, criminal habits. Because they begin by being bored, and then they seek to fill the boredom with excitement, and very often that excitement leads them into harm. So I think that too much free time is not how God has designed us to be. When Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, they were told that their life would be hard. And so it should be with us. The refreshment we find in free time is a renewal of us because of the effort that we make in our day. If the whole day is filled with no effort, then we find that free time begins to be something that takes away that refreshment and begins to corrode and unstabilize us.
Father, you said that it would be wrong if you invest a lot of the time or a big chunk of the time, even if it's in ministering and being of service in the church. How does that make sense in Christian manners? That because people feel that if they do spend a lot of time in church and they do help a lot of people around them, that they're doing something good. How is it wrong spending way too much? How is it spending too much time even a possibility in church?
I think the reason that spending too much in time is a possibility because our own spiritual tradition, the little story I gave, shows that even in the desert, where people were utterly committed to living a life of prayer, it was necessary for them to relax. We can imagine what the monks were playing. They weren't playing any game even. They were laughing with each other, you know. They weren't spending 8 hours on the Xbox in the Wadi Natrun, you know. They were just spending a little time of relaxation. Because God asks more of us than that we be in church for 24 hours a day. The church is the place where we go to receive grace and instruction to serve in the world. And part of that world we serve is the church itself, the Christian community we are part of. Part of the world we are called to serve is the society around us. And part of the world is even in other countries when we are called to go abroad as missionaries. So I think that we must be clear that we are in church for a purpose, and it is not to run away from the world, it is to be prepared for the rest of our life. And part of our life requires that we do have rest and refreshment. The very fact that physiologically we have to sleep, we will die if we don't sleep, shows us that God has made us to be people who for every now and again we must pause, we have to stop. A very great preacher cannot keep preaching for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Firstly, he will lose his voice, and God has made us that that is so. We cannot speak non-stop. Secondly, if he does not sleep, he will start to lose his attention, and then even parts of his body will begin to fail. It is God who has made us in that way, that we must stop and take refreshment. And I think this can be a good thing, because it reminds us that we are not supermen and superwomen. We do have needs. We are frail and weak in our humanity. And we even need to turn to other people to see our needs met. When I have to stop in my service and I receive some nourishment in food, I have to rely on someone else to bring me food. And I'm able to turn from myself and offer thanks to them and God. I think that these are all good reasons for us to have free time, time where we gain refreshment. They remind us of our need to seek refreshment in God. And they remind us that we can't keep going on forever and ever in our own strength, even in Christian things.
Well, what about time management within a family?
Yes.
A lot of people, they either get carried away working way too much or not, or maybe spending time with the family and the kids way too much. So it's not really balanced. How can people strike a perfect balance?
I'm not sure that a perfect balance can ever be struck, but certainly we must seek to achieve the balance. In my own ministry in the United Kingdom, I'm often travelling around the country, and many days I'm away from home, or I come home after midnight from travelling to a city or town a long way away. And my family also matter. I'm not only a priest, but I'm also a husband and a father. And what I find is that I have to examine my own schedule, and it may be that I can't always spare Saturdays and Sundays. It may be that I have to give some other day, but I have to give time just to my family. In fact, when I'm going home later on, I will spend one day just with my wife, because she needs to know that I am there as husband and she is my wife, and I'm not always there as a priest and a missionary. So I think we have to look at our lives carefully. Those who have to travel much in their work must make sure that there are 1 or 2 days when they come home that they give only to their family, that they put away their work entirely, that they try not to spend time looking on Facebook and collecting business emails, but they let their family know, I am here for you and you matter to me. So I think it takes organisation and it takes determination. This is what I am going to do. This is my work, but now I'm not even going to church. I'm going to spend time just with you, because that's what matters and that's what God requires of me.
Well, a lot of people say as well that wasting time could be considered a sin.
Yes.
So how is wasting time considered a sin? Maybe it's not the best thing to happen, but it's taken it that far to actually call it a sin.
I think that we have to, again, remember, as we've spoken of sometimes previously, that God doesn't have a long list of things that he ticks off as if they're sins and a long list of good things. That's just a pagan way of thinking of God as someone who doesn't really like us and is trying to fail us. If we think of sin as separating us from God, then we should look at our free time as a way in which we are either growing closer to God or further away from him. Now, it can be that if someone is very tired and sleeps all day, then that's what they have needed to do. It doesn't lead them away from God. It can be that someone who engages in playing sports with friends has a great sense of fellowship with other people his own age, even if they're not Christians, and that's a positive and a good thing. I think we can only speak of wasting time when we know we should have been doing something else. So if we have been learning a language, but it comes later on in the year, we just cannot be bothered to pick up the book, then we have to wonder if we are wasting that hour we had set aside. If we discover we've been out with our friends and we've spent a whole time just causing trouble in the neighbourhood, then we can think perhaps we have been wasting time. But if, when we look at what we have done in our free time, we have done things that are positive and have helped us to be refreshed, we have gone for a walk in a park and found great enjoyment. We've driven out into the mountains and looked at the beauty of God's creation. We've gone to a library and researched something of interest to us. I think in all of those things we can't speak of wasting time at all, because we find God in them still. We are doing something good and positive. It's when we look back over something we've done in the afternoon and we think, why did I do that? I have wasted the time. Then I don't think it is a sin in the same way as murdering someone or committing adultery, but we have wasted what God has given us. And that's a serious matter.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, time management is definitely something that needs to be taken care of, nurtured even within our kids and children. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of The Good Shepherd. Until we meet again. But before we actually go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Father Peter Farrington from the British Orthodox Church. Father Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, until we meet again with another topic on The Good Shepherd, I'm Hani Seif. Thank you for joining us.